What if you don't need a new podcast idea? What if you don't need a rebrand or a better hook or a different episode outline sitting half finished in your Google Docs? What the real issue is no one helped you slow down and see what your podcast is here to do. Every week, I meet with capable women who have podcast ideas, and some of them have launched it. Some have 10 episodes, some have hundreds. The problem isn't the effort. It's that the podcast exists, but it isn't clearly supporting anything. It doesn't feel anchored to the business. It doesn't feel intentional. And because of that, it feels heavy. In this episode, I want to take you behind the scenes of a clarity conversation, not to sell you, but to show you what happens when someone stops swirling and finally sees the whole picture. Because clarity isn't about having it all figured out. It's about being able to say, this podcast is here to do this, and letting everything else fall in line after that. Most podcasters don't grow because they don't have a strategy. No more. Welcome to the show, Podcast to Grow, where I help coaches and entrepreneurs turn their podcast into their most powerful business tool. I'm Elena, and I'm breaking down exactly how to get more listeners, more impact, and more sales. Let's get into it. A clarity call is a one-on-one deep dive into your podcast strategy so that we can connect the dots between what is going on. We look at what you want your podcast to do. We look at what your podcast is actually doing in your business. And we look at what your podcast needs to do in your business and how to bridge the gap between your content, your structure, and your presence. We talk about offers, positioning, call to action, and I ask you questions like, what role is your podcast playing in your business? Are your episodes building trust, or are they just filling space? Is your content designed to lead your listeners somewhere? It's 60 minutes of clarity and direction so you know exactly what to do in your next steps. Now, let me tell you about that client that I helped, that she was able to get so much clarity from that call. Let's call her Client G. G came to me. She was sitting on a podcast idea, but she was stalling out. She had this idea for 2 years. She had a name for it. She had some episodes outlined. She actually even recorded a trailer, but she never published it. And why? Because she kept thinking, what if this isn't the right topic that I have? What if I get it wrong and I mess up? What if no one listens because I'm not clear or my message isn't clear? And yeah, I have had so many clients stuck right here and they just don't move from here. And I have to say, when we started the call, her energy was all over the place. She had 6 different directions she could take her podcast. She wasn't sure what her core message was or what she wanted her podcast to focus on directly. And she kept saying, I want my podcast to feel aligned, but also strategic. So what we did was slow everything down so that we could work through each of these things that she was coming up against. So I asked her, who do you want actually listening to your podcast? What decision do you want them to make after they've listened? What decision do you want them to make after they listen to your episodes? What offer is this podcast meant to support? And suddenly the fog seemed to lift right from her. She realized she didn't need a perfect podcast. She needed a point of view. By the end of the call, we mapped out a season arc of 12 episodes that aligned with her signature offer. We created a call to action that was simple and didn't feel salesy at all to her. And she walked away saying to me, I actually feel like I can do this, Melina. I got it. And a few weeks later, she launched her podcast. And within 30 days, she had 2 client inquiries. And her words to me were, "I finally feel like this podcast is all mine." And it's working. Now, if you're thinking that kind of clarity in that call is what I need, you're not alone. The clarity you heard in that story, it's what happens inside of my strategy, visibility, and foundation offer. That's where I will talk you through where you're at, what you're building, and if it makes sense for us to work together. If it's a fit, I'll walk you through what it looks like to map out your podcast strategy together and build that kind of traction that actually supports your business. Most people think that they just need to post more, they need more episodes, they need more Substacks, more articles. But what most people need is actually getting to the core of what they are doing and their message. They don't need another content idea. They need structure. The right podcast strategy makes your podcast sound better. It makes it feel like an extension of your business, not a separate, confusing side project. And that is what clarity really means. It means knowing your audience and knowing how your podcast supports both of these things. And when you have this, your episodes flow much easier, your message lands so much stronger, and your podcast becomes a platform, not an extra thing that you have to do or put on your plate that week. What I hope you heard in the story today isn't just what changed for her, but why it changed. And it didn't shift because she worked harder or she posted more. The shift happened because she had space to make the decision on what her podcast was here to support. And once that decision was made, everything else felt lighter. If your podcast feels noisy, scattered, or harder than it should, it's usually not a motivation problem. It's usually a clarity problem. And that's all I wanted to name today. Thanks for listening. I'll be talking to you about why keeping your podcast in the "I'm just figuring it out" stage is the problem. If you've enjoyed the show, come hang with me on my list. That's where I share deeper strategies, behind the scenes stories, and even access to everything I'm working on. No fluff, just what's working for podcasts right now. Head to the link in the show notes to join the email fam.